Everyone's obsessed with ChatGPT versus Claude versus Gemini, but the actual winner of the AI race is going to be whoever controls the data centers. Yesterday, Google announced it's investing $15 billion into infrastructure specifically for Anthropic. This single deal just exposed what the real battle for AI supremacy actually looks like. And it's not what you think. Most news coverage talks about model benchmarks, training strategies, and novel architectures. Sure, those matter, but there's a grinding bottleneck almost nobody's talking about: raw computational power at truly massive scale. You can't train a frontier AI model on your laptop. You need thousands of high-end GPUs networked together in a climate-controlled industrial warehouse, drawing megawatts of electricity every hour, costing billions of dollars to build and operate. Whoever controls those facilities controls which AI companies can even exist at scale. Google understands this completely. They're not just building competitive AI features, they're bankrolling the actual physical infrastructure that Claude needs to run globally. It's the difference between owning a restaurant versus owning the farm that supplies all of its food. Here's where it gets interesting. This move is reshaping the entire AI supply chain. Nexus Data Centers isn't some scrappy startup. It's a specialized company that builds and operates data center infrastructure specifically for AI computing. Think of them as the people who rent out the computational real estate. They understand power delivery, cooling systems, networking architecture, all the boring but essential machinery that keeps thousands of GPUs working in sync without overheating or losing connection. The deal announced yesterday works like this. Google is putting $15 billion into funding Nexus to build new data center capacity that will be reserved for Anthropic. Anthropic is Claude's creator, Google's main strategic rival in the AI race, but Google is their backer. This isn't just money changing hands. It's a calculated strategic move. Why would Google do this? Because Google and Anthropic have a complicated relationship. Anthropic is independent, but Google has invested heavily in them and basically ensures they have access to capital and infrastructure. By funding Nexus to build capacity for Anthropic, Google is doing two critical things simultaneously. First, it's ensuring that Claude stays competitive so there's real competition in the market, which makes Google look good to regulators. Second, it's securing its own influence over the infrastructure layer of AI. Even if Anthropic's models compete with Google's, Google owns part of the physical pipes. This is empire building at the infrastructure level. Building a world-class data center for AI isn't like building a regular server farm. It's more like building an oil refinery. You need enormous amounts of power. We are talking 100 to 200 megawatts for a single facility, which is enough to power 80,000 to 160,000 homes. You need custom-designed water cooling systems because modern AI chips generate absolutely insane heat. You need redundancy built into every single layer, backup power, redundant networking, backup internet connections, because if something fails, you're losing millions of dollars per hour. Then there's the land problem. You can't build a data center in downtown Manhattan. You need rural industrial areas with access to cheap electrical power, fiber optic cables running through, and vast room to expand. Nexus specializes in finding these locations, getting land permits, bringing in utility infrastructure, and making them operational. They're like the general contractors of AI computing. The money part is brutal. A single data center facility can cost $5 to $10 billion to build and get fully operational. Then you have ongoing staffing, maintenance, and power costs, hundreds of millions per year. The only way this makes financial sense is if you have a customer committed to using that capacity for years. That's why Google funding this for Anthropic is such a big deal. Google is essentially betting $15 billion that Anthropic will grow dramatically and stay a paying customer for a decade. But here's what most people don't realize. Once these facilities are built, they become incredibly efficient at producing AI. So what exactly will Anthropic do with this new capacity? The short answer is everything. Right now, Anthropic's limited by how many GPUs they can access and how much power they can consume. With $15 billion in infrastructure built specifically for them, they can do three massive things simultaneously. First, they'll train newer, more capable versions of Claude at a scale they've never attempted before. Training a frontier AI model, something as capable as Claude or GPT-4o, burns through enormous amounts of computational power over weeks or months. More data center capacity means they can run multiple training experiments in parallel instead of queuing up for limited resources. Second, they can run inference, answering user questions, at massive scale. Right now, when millions of people use Claude simultaneously, the requests compete for the same GPU clusters. New data center capacity means Anthropic can split the workload across more machines, making Claude faster and more responsive. Third, they can experiment. Currently, every experiment is expensive because compute is scarce. With their own dedicated infrastructure, researchers can test new training techniques, new architectures, new ideas, without rationing every GPU hour. This is what separates frontier AI labs from everyone else. OpenAI has massive compute. Meta has massive compute. Google has massive compute. The companies without their own infrastructure are forced to use cloud providers like Amazon Web Services, which is more expensive and less flexible. And this is where the story gets fascinating, because Google knows exactly what they are enabling. Google's $15 billion infrastructure play for Anthropic isn't unique. It's part of a much bigger pattern. Every major AI player is racing to lock down computational capacity because it's become the actual bottleneck. Microsoft invested in OpenAI by guaranteeing them exclusive access to massive Azure data center capacity. They didn't just give OpenAI money, they committed data center real estate. That commitment is worth billions because it ensures OpenAI can train and serve models without competing with other customers for resources. Meta is building their own in-house data centers specifically for AI research. They invested billions in their own facilities rather than rely on cloud providers. Why? Because renting compute from Amazon is expensive and slow. Owning your own infrastructure means you can squeeze out every bit of efficiency. NVIDIA manufactures the GPUs that power everything, but even they are investing in data center infrastructure because they know the future of AI depends on access to specialized facilities. They understand that chip sales alone won't be enough, you have to own the full stack. But here's the twist that most coverage gets wrong. Google funding infrastructure for Anthropic looks like it's helping a rival. Actually, it's brilliant strategy. Google is essentially saying to regulators, look, we are funding the entire AI ecosystem, not just building Google AI internally. It makes them look good. Meanwhile, they own part of the infrastructure layer, which gives them leverage over the entire industry. The company that controls the pipes wins, regardless of who's running the models. This infrastructure play is reshaping who can compete in AI. It's not just about being smart anymore, it's about having enough money to build data centers. This has massive implications for startups, smaller labs, and countries outside the West. A smart researcher with a brilliant idea can't just build frontier AI anymore. They need billions in capital. They need access to data center real estate. They need long-term power contracts. This raises the barrier to entry dramatically. The companies that can compete are the ones that are already massive. Google, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon. Adding Anthropic to that list only happened because they had massive early funding and Google's backing. This also means that computational access is becoming a weapon in AI competition. Google can use infrastructure as leverage. If they are funding your data centers, they have influence over your timeline, your capabilities, your priorities. It's not quite control, but it's power. For consumers, this probably means faster AI and better models. Anthropic will have resources to train more sophisticated Claude versions, but it also means fewer companies competing at the frontier, which could mean higher prices and less innovation long-term. When there are only 5 companies that can afford data center infrastructure, those 5 companies get to decide what AI looks like. For countries watching this happen, especially India, the European Union, and China, the message is clear. If you can't control your own AI infrastructure, someone else will. If you're watching these AI company deals and wondering how infrastructure funding actually works, here's the breakdown. When Google announces $15 billion for Nexus to build capacity for Anthropic, it's not a single payment. It's usually structured as Google provides capital upfront, Nexus builds the facility over 18 to 36 months. Then Anthropic signs a long-term usage contract, typically 10 years, committing to rent that capacity at an agreed rate. Google gets return on their investment through a combination of returns on their Anthropic stake and potential revenue sharing if Nexus is profitable. Nexus benefits because they get guaranteed long-term revenue. Building a facility is incredibly risky. You're betting billions that your customer will stay and pay. With Google backing it, Nexus has assurance that the money will be there and the customer will use the capacity. Anthropic's benefits because they're getting infrastructure financing that would normally be hard to secure. Building a data center usually requires proven revenue and technical expertise. Anthropic gets both because Google co-signs the deal. When you're evaluating these announcements, watch for a few key things. First, what's the actual capital commitment? 15 billion sounds huge, but is it all upfront or spread over years? Second, what's the expected capacity? How many GPUs, how much power? Third, who holds long-term operational risk if something goes wrong? These details matter because they tell you whether a deal is real or mostly marketing. Here's what this deal actually tells us about the future of AI. The real competition isn't going to be at the model level. It's going to be at the infrastructure level. Whoever builds the most efficient data centers, secures the most power contracts, and attracts the most customers will win. The models are important, sure, but infrastructure is where empires are built. Google making this $15 billion commitment signals something important. They are saying we are confident the AI market will grow so dramatically that even our competitors need infrastructure that we partially fund. That's a sign of how big this is about to become. For Anthropic, this is a watershed moment. They went from being a startup to being part of a trillion-dollar AI infrastructure story. For Nexus, they're now a player in the highest stakes industry on Earth. For everyone else building AI companies, the message is clear. You need infrastructure backing or you can't compete at scale. Watch for more announcements like this over the next year. More funding for data center capacity. More companies locking down long-term power contracts. More countries racing to build domestic AI infrastructure capacity. Because now that we've seen Google commit $15 billion to infrastructure, every other player is scrambling to lock down capacity before it's all claimed. The AI race is still about who builds the smartest models. But before that happens, there's a race to secure the pipes that will run them.